Loss-making perfectly competitive markets. Now, let's start with the diagram. Where does the average cost curve have to be for this perfectly competitive market to make a loss? Simply, it just has to be above the D equals AI equals MR curve, so it looks something like this. So AC, and now of course let's add our MC curve, so just something like that. So now, this firm would be making a loss. Why? Let's look at the profit maximization quantity. This is where MC equals MR, so just this black dot here, then we go down from here to find the Qmax quantity, so the quantity at where we profit maximize. Then, from the Qmax quantity, we keep going up until we hit our AC curve. So, in this situation, we'd be going like this, and then once we hit our AC curve, we go left. And this would give us a box now. Now, once we've labelled it up, it will look something like this. But what does this box represent here? Because remember, our average cost is above our price. So that box is actually a box of loss. And a common mistake students will do, they'll label it all up perfectly, but then they'll label the box as supernormal profit. But just keep in mind, your average cost is above your price, therefore you will be making a loss. Now, if you remember back to a previous video, in the long run, perfectly competitive markets will always make normal profit. So how do we go from this short run position of making a loss to then making profits in the long run? So let's start with thinking about individual firms. How will it affect individual firms if they are making a loss? It will mean individual firms are incentivized to leave the market. And since there are no barriers to entry / exit, so no, for example, sunk costs, firms are going to leave the market, and that is in fact going to shift our supply curve inwards, so from S to S plus 1 yet again. So the shift inwards of the supply curve will lead to a new equilibrium, thus a new equilibrium price. This will therefore mean, because firms are price takers, there will be a new equilibrium price in the market, represented by the purple demand curve, so D1 equals AR1 equals MR1. But looking at this curve, profit maximizing at this point, if we go down, we are still making losses. So even though the box of losses is smaller now, there is still losses in the market. So that means the shift inwards of supply will continue because firms will still be incentivized to leave the market due to there are still losses being made in the market. So looking at the new red line, this is where the shift inwards of supply will stop. Why? Because if we look at the demand curve, it intersects the AC curve. This means when this firm is profit maximizing, it will make normal profits, not a loss, meaning there's no incentive for firms to now leave the market, meaning the perfectly competitive market has now again reached its long run equilibrium. Moving on, let's summarize everything I've just said into some notes. So firstly, how can a perfectly competitive market be making a loss? Which curve has to be above another curve for a firm to make a loss? This happens when your average cost curve is above your D equals AI equals MR curve, because remember, your D equals AI equals MR curve is your price. So if your price is lower than your costs, you will be making a loss. Now, what happens in perfectly competitive markets when they are making a loss? Now, the main thing you need to remember, in the long run, perfectly competitive markets will always make normal profits. But in the short run, they can be making supernormal profits or they can be making losses. But remember, in the long run, this will always translate into normal profits. Now, firstly, when firms are making losses, how does it affect the individual firms? It means they are incentivized to leave the market due to the losses. And just like before, the next step in your chain of analysis needs to be linking back to your content knowledge on the characteristics of perfectly competitive markets. So the next thing you need to say is this is due to no barriers to exit, E.G. no sunk costs. Firms will leave, causing supply curve to shift inwards, causing equilibrium price to increase. And this is such a common mistake I see when marking students' papers. Because they're so used to the other side of things, you need to remember when supply curve shifts inwards, equilibrium price will actually increase. And then how long does this shift in of supply continue for? This continues until normal profits are being made. So when your demand curve equals your average cost curve, or as a more understandable way, when your price equals your costs. Meaning now, as we're not making a loss and we're making normal profits, the perfectly competitive market is back to its long run equilibrium.